So I'll give you three ideas that come primarily from the work we did in the second book, Designing Your Work Life, but it's all really part of the same idea that you can use a designer's mindset and a designer's process to come up with new to the world versions of yourself. Hello, everyone. I think that introduction was just about designing your life. And I'm going to call this talk, Designing Your Life, Build Your Way Forward. And it's all about the life design philosophy that my good friend, Dave Evans, who's my partner in the Life Design Lab at Stanford, we've been working on, for the last 12 years or so. So at Stanford University, we have a life design lab where we explore the intersection of design thinking, I'll explain what that is, life design, I'll explain what that is, and positive psychology. So I'm going to walk you through a very quick idea of what's that all about, and then I'm going to give you three ideas that I think are kind of useful when you're thinking about designing your life, and then we're going to answer questions. So Dave's not here, but what we did is after we started the lab in 2016, we wrote a book called Designing Your Life. It turned out to be a pretty popular book, New York Times bestseller. It was translated into 23 languages, including into German. And then we wrote a second book that came out just at the beginning of the pandemic called Designing Your Work Life. And what those books are all about is examining the problem in both work and life that, people are disengaged. When you look at the Gallup survey across the world and in each different region, 69% of US workers say they're disengaged at work. They don't really care very much about work. And 85% of global workers report that they're unhappy at work. And when you're unhappy at work because you have a life with work in it, you're unhappy in your life. So we wanted to tackle that problem, and we were looking at the principles of positive psychology and what makes people happy, actually what causes people to thrive and flourish. And we realized that combining that with our ideas about how to do design, we could come up with something that was absolutely brand new. So people are stuck on lousy jobs. They're stuck with a lack of meaning, both in their jobs and their lives. People are really stuck right now with the political scene, both in the US and Germany and the EU. It doesn't seem like our governments are working very well. And then, of course, the global pandemic, which started, way back in February and March of 2020. And it's we're just now starting to see some signs that we may be out of that. I'm going to address the pandemic specifically in my idea number 3. So we realized it was time to think different, time to think the way designers think. Now, I've been an academic for the last 14 years, but prior to that, I was mostly a designer working in industry. I started out my career designing the Star Wars action figures for a company that's now called Hasbro Toys. And then later, I was at Apple Computer for 7 years when we were designing the very, very first laptops. So I know how designers think. And they think a little bit differently because they kind of try to solve problems where you can't get a lot of data. If you're trying to invent something brand new to the world, a new iPhone, for instance, well, you can't really get much data about what does a never before invented thing look like. So designers have developed a process we call design thinking that allows them to invent new to the world things. And what could be more new to the world than the future of your life? So designers have a process. Forget accept for a second. Mostly when I'm teaching my young designers how to do design thinking, I'm teaching them first start with empathy. Start with a deep dive on human need. Then redefine the problem and ideate, come up with lots of ideas, because we know from our research that if you have lots of ideas, you have better choices. And then prototype and test. And this is the build your way forward part. This is the prototype and test cycle that is the way we create new to the world things. Now, I added one more step when we started the Life Design Lab, and that's the step called accept. If my partner Dave were here, he would say, you can't solve a problem you're not willing to have. In other words, you can't start working on something until you've decided that this is a real problem and it's something that you think deserves your attention. So designers also have a different mindset. They think a little differently. They start with curiosity, and then they reframe problems. They come up with a better way to think about the problem. They do what we call radical collaboration. They work with others of different backgrounds, different points of view, in order to have these collisions of ideas, which create the possibility of innovation. They're very mindful of their process because sometimes you're diverging, coming up with more ideas. Sometimes you're converging, you're just prototyping and testing a few things. And then down here in the corner is the biased action mindset. We try stuff, we do stuff. We don't do a lot of analysis because there's no point in analyzing for the unknown future. There is no data. So I'll give you 3 ideas that come primarily from the work we did in the second book, Designing Your Work Life, but it's all really part of the same idea that you can use a designer's mindset and a designer's process to come up with new to the world versions of yourself. So 3 ideas. The first one is really the designing your life and designing your work life process down to 4 steps and 10 words, at least 10 words in English. And the first step is get curious. I mentioned the designer's mindset of curiosity. Humans are intrinsically curious. It's one of our intrinsic motivations. People will do things simply because they're curious about the interesting information they might discover or the interesting experience they might have. So the first thing is to get curious because that's the energy that propels you into the new version of you. Then you go out and you talk to people. Talking to people is where we get an engagement with the world, radical collaboration. And sometimes talking to people is even like running a little prototype, a little version of yourself in the future. Because no matter what you want to do, no matter what change you want to make in your life, someone in the world is already doing that thing. And by talking to them, you travel in time into the future they're already inhabiting. And they're creating their life. And by listening to their story, you can find out if that might be a life that you want to try. Then you try stuff. That's the biased action mindset. You run lots and lots and lots of prototypes. You build and try your way forward. And then you tell your story. Because it isn't telling our stories that we connect with other humans. And this isn't about being boastful or bragging. This is literally simply talking about the journey you're on and collaborating in that journey with other people who might be helpful, might be even an opportunity to work with someone you would never have met if you hadn't followed this process. So really, it's a circular process. We start with curiosity. Let me get a little bit out of the way here. We start with curiosity. Then we talk to people, then we try stuff, then we tell our story, which leads to more things to be curious about, more people to talk to, and we just keep working this cycle. It's a virtuous cycle. You're taking your curiosity out for a walk. And when you do that, you meet other interesting and curious people. And guess what? When you're curious about the world, when you're talking to people and trying things, you become an interesting person, a person that people want to talk to as well. So number 1, if you remember nothing else, 4 steps, 10 words. Get curious, talk to people, try stuff, tell your story. It's kind of magical what happens when you put yourself in the world this way. And then the world begins to offer you interesting things to do. The second one is the money versus meaning dilemma. There's a lot of what psychologists call dysfunctional beliefs in the world. This is one of them, the money versus meaning thing. And at any time you have a dichotomy like this, a balance of money versus meaning, then there's no way to win. Because if you have more money, you have less meaning. The balance implies that there is no no optimization. There is no best state. The best state is kind of mediocre everything, and that's false. Whenever we see a false dichotomy, we know we've reached a dysfunctional belief. And then, as designers, we do a reframe. We're going to get rid of the dysfunctional belief, and we're going to change to the question that's underlying this belief. And that's the question, well, what do you make? What do you make? And it's time to enlarge the question, because some people are making money and some people maybe are making meaning, but what else is going on? And I take from that this Albert Einstein quote: not everything that can be counted counts. And not everything that counts can be counted. You can't count love, you can't count learning, you can't count a lot of things in the world. So let's be very careful about what we measure, about what we make, because we are all in the new world makers. So we came up with something we called the maker mix, which is, instead of a false dichotomy of money and meaning, what can I do? I can only have a little of each. You can actually, if you think about your life as a song, and you imagine that you're the sound engineer mixing the quality of your song, and you have three things you can mix. In the market economy, you make money. That's how people measure or count in the marketplace. What is something worth? You're paid to do that work. In the social economy, if you work for a nonprofit or you work for a government or an NGO, then what you're trying to make is impact. Your nonprofit is trying to help kids learn to read early, because you know that if you have an impact on them early, they'll be more successful later. Or you're running a shelter for women who are in bad situations to get them out of those situations so that you can have the impact on their lives. You're not measuring that in money. You're measuring it in impact. And the people I know who work in the social economy feel very full when they know they have a big impact. We have another exercise we have people do where they imagine three odysseys for their life. And in every single case, of the thousands of times we've done that, people say, gee, if I could design my future, I'd like it to be a little more creative. Could I have some more creativity in my life? So we went and we talked to artists and dancers and writers and singers and songwriters and people who are in the creative economy and said, how do you get paid? And they said, in the creative economy, you make expression. If I get to sing my song, perform my play, people see my painting, I'm happy. It's not about money. I don't want to do my art on the market's terms. Then I'd have to make horrible art. I just want to have expression. All right. So now it's not a dichotomy. It's a beautiful song, and you're mixing. Your capacity and your output level is your maker mix. And here's how it works. You have a little audio mixer. You have three sliders: money, impact, and expression. And you set those sliders, and then you say, do I like that mix? What could I add to my life that would make it just a little bit better? And we could actually do this if we had time, but you can do this while I'm talking. Just take a piece of paper, right? Put three sliders on it. Set your current output levels. Right now, maybe you're happy with the amount of money you're making. You're not making much impact or expression. Pick a slider you'd like to try to move. I'd like to move my expression dial up. I'd like to do more creative work. Set that dial to where you think a good mix would be. By the way, when you're mixing a song, you don't put all the levels to maximum. That'd be a horrible mix, right? You need a little of everything in order to make a beautiful song and to make a beautiful life. So relocate one of these dials and then think to yourself, what could I do in the next week, literally next week? What could I prototype? What small experiment could I run in the next week that would add a little expression? Could I go to an open mic night and listen to poets? Might I even write a poem and go to open mic and recite my poem? Or if I want more impact, could I go down to the homeless shelter here in San Francisco? We have a horrible homeless problem, people who are unhoused. Could I go down to the shelter and just volunteer an afternoon, maybe to hand out some lunches? So find a way to change your mix and keep mixing until you find the song that's right for you now. And by the way, that mix will change over time. Okay, so the maker mix, second big idea. You're more than just money versus meaning. It's money, impact, and expression. That's how we get paid. Well, then the pandemic came. As I said, we released Designing Your Work Life on February 25th. I was in New York at the launch and many, many marketing events. And then, of course, the pandemic hit and we were in big trouble. And all the bookstores closed and people didn't read the book. But we started thinking about designing your COVID life. What is it like? And in fact, we're going to re-release the book in October with 3 new chapters about the world after the disruption. Not just of COVID, the disruption of COVID, the disruption of climate change. We have massive fires here in California. I'm zooming in from San Francisco. There's all sorts of disruptions going on, political disruptions, social disruptions, and the pandemic. So we turned to the work of a guy who studied disruption and transitions, a guy named William Bridges. He mostly works in the corporate world, but he makes a distinction between change and transition. The change of the COVID situation is we went from freedom to lockdown. And now maybe we'll go back to freedom at some point. That's the situation. But the transition is the psychological process we all had to go through to understand what the heck was going on. And that has been a very difficult psychological translation as people have come to terms with COVID. But he makes the point that at the end and letting go of something in the old pre-COVID, in the before times when we had lots of personal freedom, and then the new thing, people think it goes like this. We go from the old to the new. He said, no, that's not it at all. In fact, what happens is we go through this massive period of time, as we've all been through, where it's uncertain. It's uncertain where the world is going. And we are all now in that, maybe a little more towards the new beginning, hopefully, with vaccinations and, slowly over time. But everybody was sitting in the waiting room. And you know what it feels like to be in the waiting room? You're waiting for your doctor's appointment. You're waiting for your car to be fixed. And you're getting impatient because the doctor is late. The car is late. And we all are getting very impatient. And it's very difficult to do your best work in that state. It's very difficult to be creative in that state. So we said, no, it's not about that. It's actually the neutral zone. His framing is that in the neutral zone, you can do very, very interesting work. And we noticed this idea of acceptance. We noticed that, let me get my head out of the way here. We noticed that the Kubler-Ross change curve, which is the curve around coming to terms with grief. We're all in a grief cycle. Well, the last step of the grief cycle is accept. And the first step of our side is accept. And so we realized what we had to do is figure out how to accept a different way. And we've noticed that in the pandemic, some people are doing oppressed accept. Oppressed is like, oh, this is so hard, but I guess I'll get through it. Very difficult. Some people are doing suppressed accept. I'm going to suppress my feelings. I'm just going to be a strong soldier and soldier on. But neither of those is sustainable. You need an engaged acceptance, and you need to reframe from the neutral zone to from the waiting room to the neutral zone. Because in the neutral zone, we can accept and engage and get ready for what's coming next. So 3 ideas in almost exactly 18 minutes. Get curious, talk to people, try stuff, tell your story, dial in your maker mix, make a beautiful song, and participate in engaged acceptance. If you just take these 3 ideas, particularly the get curious, talk to people, and try stuff, you might find that getting through the rest of this global pandemic from the neutral zone to the new world will just be a little more livable. And if you mix a beautiful song, you'll always be in a state that is generative and engaged.